Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Break in the Game show here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. I'm Stephen Gillespie, and joining me for our 50th episode since we've rebranded the Break in the Game show and have set up a co-host style show, Austin Carr. Congratulations, good sir, on our 50th episode and the rebranding of Break in the Game. How's it going, man?
Yeah, man. Thank you. You too. It's going great. You know, you told me the other day this was going to be our 50th show, and when I heard that, it blew me away because it feels like we've hardly been doing this very long at all. But then, I look back at all the cool things that we've already gotten to do for the listeners and for ourselves, and we've done a lot. So I'm proud to be a part of the group, man. How are you doing today?
Absolutely. Dude, I'm doing outstanding. I'm thrilled to death that for one, that I've known you for as long as we have. Like we met during last year, and it's just crazy to me, like you said, that it's already been 50 episodes. It's just a lot of people don't make it as far as what we've done now, and we've gone a long way from just doing it for the fun of it to all of a sudden both of us are on the Off the Ball network together, and then we get picked up by this amazing place called the Nothing But Net channel here on Dash Radio, and just kicking it, man, and it's awesome. And we have a fellow podcaster, the Shoot Basketball Podcast, wrote in and said, congratulations on 50. Thank you guys so much. You guys do a lot of great work too. Recommend go checking them out. But yeah, Austin, it's awesome. It's been a pleasure just serving alongside you for 50 episodes, man.
I remember back when I was starting my own podcast or thinking about getting into it by myself, and I would see people's shows who had like 35, 40 episodes and thought to myself, man, that sounds like forever from here. But it flies by for sure.
Yeah, and like we've been saying, it's been fun. Hopefully here's the 50 more times 50 more times 50 more times 50 more. And speaking of which, what a great time to have our 50th episode, because we've had a pair of 50-point games. The NBA couldn't have scripted this better for us themselves. Thank you so much, NBA, for allowing this to happen. So, Austin, we've had Jamal Murray against the Cleveland Cavaliers put up 50 piece. And then we also had Joel Embiid against the Chicago Bulls pull up a 50 piece. Kind of what stood out to you between these two and the way that these gentlemen went about getting their 50 points?
Well, the polar opposites kind of in terms of how they got their points. On one side, you've got Joel Embiid, who I think took 17 free throw attempts and I made 15 to get to his 50. And then on the other side, you've got Jamal Murray, who's a guard, who usually when you think of good free throw shooting, you think of guard play more often than not. And he became the first 50-point scorer to not even attempt a free throw in a game, which is crazy to me, just considering like how often he attacks the basket, at least in general, and how much, how active he is. It was pretty crazy when I saw that. And, I've been talking up Embiid. He's my boy. So he had our back and got us this 50-point game so we could talk about it on our 50th episode.
Yeah, I mean, for all those who are kind of new to what Austin and I, the way that we do our shows, the way we evaluate things, we put a lot of thought, time, effort, and energy in when we prepare for these shows. And then also just whenever we start preparing for the early season MVP votes and things like that, Joel Embiid is the favorite for both of us. A lot of people at the Off the Ball Network believe that Joel Embiid right now is the front runner for the most valuable player award in the NBA. But Jamal Murray kind of came into the season, Austin, as a little bit of underwhelming, almost a disappointment, if you will, right? Because the Denver Nuggets hadn't been doing so hot. Nikola Jokic had been that steadfast player. He himself had his first 50-point game a couple weeks back in a amazing fashion, but Jamal Murray has not really stepped out to look like he was ascending in the bubble to be a superstar. He hadn't had a performance like that this season. But then again, this past Friday against the Cleveland Cavaliers at Cleveland, by the way, played 38 minutes. He shot 21 of 25 from the floor. That's 84%, quick math, if you will. 8 of 10 from 3-point line. I'm from Arkansas. I can do division with 10s. That's 80%. We mentioned already 0 free throw attempts. If you're breaking down the number of possessions that he had and converting that into how many times he scored per possession, that's 1.92 points per possession. That's insane. Almost 2 points every time he had the ball in his hand. He drew 4 fouls, committed 4. Only had 2 assists, did get 6 rebounds, 2 steals, and only 1 turnover in this 50-point game, Austin. That's phenomenal. And then to wrap it up, again, the most points scored by someone without a single free throw attempt in NBA history, Austin.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's almost mind-boggling just to hear you say that, because my mind keeps going back to those playoff games and those bubble games where he had these 50-point games and he was taking over, down 3-1 twice and pulled his team back. And he was like just kind of like breakneck to the rim over and over. I mean, he shot a lot of threes too, but it was like, he's going to put his head down and go through the guy to get to the basket if he had to. And usually smaller, he's not small, but guys that are 6'8", 6'9", guys his size tend to get, beat up a little bit when they go in the lane like he does. And to shoot 21 of 25, like when I hear that, I think the only thing I think of is like, that's like a Thursday night for Zion. But, other than that, that's crazy. A perimeter player to only miss 4 out of 25 shots.
Yeah, and 8 of 10 from deep is phenomenal. And then you mentioned earlier on the flip side of that, we had a completely different style of play to get to 50 points with Joel Embiid against Chicago on that very same night. So we had 100 points combined on the same night between these two gentlemen. Right. That's insane. Joel Embiid played 3 minutes fewer than Jamal Murray. He played 35 minutes. Shot 17 of 26 from the field. That's only 65% compared to the 84% from Jamal Murray. Was 1 of 2 from the three-point line. And then it was 15 of 17 from the free throw line. So here we talk about a center being just automatic, shooting 88% from the free throw line. And then if you want to compare his points per possession to Jamal Murray's, he only had 1.43 points per possession. How about this, Austin? He drew 11 fouls and only committed 2, being the, their version of the Stifle Tower in Philadelphia, right? And then the rest of his stats looked a little something like this, Austin. He actually had more assists than Jamal Murray. He had 5 assists, 17 rebounds, just as many steals with 2, had 4 blocks, and had 2 turnovers compared to the 1 for Jamal Murray. So both of these gentlemen scored. They took care of the ball. They went about it in different ways. But Austin, as we do with everything NBA, I have to ask you this question. And real quick before I do, our vice president at the Off the Ball Network, Jeff Hunt, wrote in and said, I love these young players. We're right there with you, Jeff. Absolutely. These gentlemen did great. So Austin, I have to ask you, who did it better?
Well, I think you could kind of look at it in 2 ways and get 2 different answers.
There can only be one, Austin.
Okay. I won't.
I'm on the show too, by the way.
I'm going with Embiid. I think for my money, I like Joel Embiid. I think he did it better, just for the fact that he almost fouled out 2 guys on the other team by himself without getting in foul trouble. And when I look at that total stat line, what it reminds me of? It reminds me of like Shaquille O'Neal stat lines from back in the 2000s. And what's interesting about that to me is who was the last center to win MVP?
That would be Shaquille O'Neal.
Shaquille O'Neal. And we're seeing Joel Embiid have a season that's very comparable to what Shaquille O'Neal was doing during his prime with the Lakers. So, I just think that's the writing on the wall, man. If the NBA doesn't get, stuck in their minds that LeBron has to win it because he's 36, I guess. Joel Embiid, if you really just look at the performances, he definitely deserves to be the front runner. So I like Murray. I think he probably is a little more exciting to watch, but for my money, I'm taking Embiid.
Well, and again, it's all about perspective and what you enjoy watching in a game. And Austin, I would just let you know that the lovely fans on NBA Twitter, I had a disagreement with them, if you could ever believe me disagreeing with anybody about anything.
Don't listen to him, everybody. He's not like this outside of the show. He's much more willing to argue. I'm a nice guy. But anyway, I was talking with the gentleman on NBA Twitter, and I shared the same viewpoint as you. I think that if you consider, it's easy to fall in love with, saying, well, Jamal Murray did it without a single free throw attempt, and Joel Embiid had, 17 freebies. Well, one, they're not freebies. You still have to go and get them. The fact that Joel Embiid is hitting an 88% clip from the free throw line as a 7-foot center, pretty phenomenal. I actually think that that's more impressive, right? I love the fact that he was aggressive. You mentioned that he essentially pretty much fouled out 2 guys of the opposing team single-handedly and only committed 2 fouls himself.
only one more turnover than Jamal Murray, but he passed the ball more. He shared
Mhm.
the rock more. He crashed the glass more and was more aggressive from the floor. So that's why I would say Joel Embiid. But like you said, Austin, since you went on and, painted a very beautiful picture of why I agree with you, I will also give Jamal Murray credit and say that 8 of 10 from deep is pretty awesome. I mean, it's almost at that Steph Curry, Zach LaVine level. It was only a couple back from him. And the fact that he was 21 or 25, you mentioned Zion Williamson. What a great comparison. But to a guy who is probably not very much taller, but almost probably 100 pounds heavier
Right.
easily than Jamal Murray.
I thought it was interesting, just when I was thinking about it in my mind, because on one hand, you got a physical monster that shoots from 2 feet away every time. And on the other hand, you've got a guy who is, a little point guard and making almost every three he took. But it worked out well for both of them. How often do you see 21 out of 25? Jeez.
Again, you have to be a big man for the most part to be able to do this. And if you're a guard, I think of guys like Tony Parker and Kyrie Irving, and guys who could get to the paint and actually score and were pretty creative around there. Jamal Murray, we know that he's most known as a jump shooter, right? But he was able to get to the paint and finish around, tough defensive positioning and did a good job.
I'll tell you what, more and more as this season plays out compared to some of the performances we saw in the bubble, I think it's starting to become pretty clear who spent the time, off during the shutdown working on their game and who, sat on the couch watching TV, because there was some guys that absolutely dominated their competition in the bubble, like in ways that I've never seen them do before. And it's not just Murray who hasn't lived up to that level of play. There's a lot of guys around the league that have kind of, and it's not even necessarily that they're doing anything worse or different. It's just, it's kind of more, I feel like it's probably more of a little bit level playing field again. Everybody's kind of back in their regular routines and stuff to an extent. So that was just something interesting that I've kind of been thinking about for a while.
Well, it's not even just the players that balled out in the bubble. Look at the teams that made the Eastern and Western Conference Finals. Only one of the 4 teams that made it that far looked like they have a fairly legitimate chance of making it there again, that being the Los Angeles Lakers. Oh, but wait, they lost Anthony Davis, which we talked about a little bit last week. So with that being said, you talked about how, Jamal Murray hadn't been one of those guys that balled out in the bubble and brought that into the season. Someone who did was Donovan Mitchell. And who does Donovan Mitchell play for? That would be the Utah Jazz, which is where we're going to segue next. That's a nice little transition. Thank you. I'll take a moment of silence for the transition.
There you go.
Okay, there we go. All right, so speaking of the Utah Jazz and taking a moment of silence, they finally lost the game, Austin, to the Los Angeles Clippers. It was a close game. They were at LA. They lose 116 to 112. Obviously, them being the 112 of that score there. So I remember watching this game, Austin, in the early part of it, and it looked like Utah was going to get the break speed off of them. And, they made it a close game. It came down to the wire. They had a valiant effort. We know that they play team offense and team defense. Rudy Gobert does a tremendous job of locking up the back half of that defense. And then we saw, a good game from Donovan, Bojan Bogdanovic. Clarkson had a decent game. Mike Conley Jr. had a good first half. He kind of tailed off towards the end of that game. But ultimately, the Clippers just had it that night. And it was probably the first game in a while that the Clippers had their full complement of players, and they looked like they were actually, gunning for a win against a good team. Like it looked like they truly wanted a win for once this season. Again, I talked about this earlier, Austin, that I want the Clippers to have a season that means something. And now that they won this game, it's, almost like, okay, well, whatever, show it to me in the playoffs, right? That's always where it goes when the Clippers have a good game. It's what have you done for me in the playoffs?
Oh, definitely. And it bothers me to an extent, but at the same time, it's the Clippers and they're always going to be little brother no matter what. So it doesn't hurt me too much, but just in general, the whole mindset that at a certain point, nothing matters what you do until the playoffs. Like it does, because I think this was a pretty big win for the Clippers. Obviously Utah's been on a roll, almost unbeatable for the better part of 30-day calendar month. And they had, looking at the numbers, I watched 5 minutes of the game live and caught all the highlights. Looking at the numbers, it looks like a game that the Jazz should win if you look at what their guys did. And so it sounds to me like the Clippers, were healthy and showed that this is kind of the issue everybody still kind of has with the Jazz, even though they've won so much, is at their best, are they better than the Clippers? At their best, are they better than the Lakers when they're all at their best? And they haven't, they don't have the track record to show that. They've been extremely consistent. And I, for one, do think they pose a threat to both those teams. But a loss like this to the Clippers doesn't help the Jazz. And if it was anybody but the Clippers, that's all they would be talking about after this was a statement win. But because it's the Clippers, they don't get to have statements until the playoffs.
Correct. Yeah, their statements are reserved for when it matters the most. But we talk about the top three of the Western Conference right now. I got the standings in front of me, Austin. Utah has fallen all the way down to 2 games ahead of the Clippers and the Lakers. Both LA teams are tied right now for second place, with I believe the Clippers holding the tiebreaker, if I'm not mistaken. Utah is 9-1 in their last 10. That's just pathetic. They lose a game, and it's just awful. They're on a 1 game.
Wasn't it Ronnie Brewer that said Thibodeau wanted them at least 7-3, and those 9-1s weren't even good enough all the time?
Yeah, I mean, and this is a guy, Ronnie Brewer, who played in Utah, but he also played under Thibodeau. So 2 different coaching styles, but ultimately very demanding coaches at the end of the day. So again, the Utah Jazz right now, they've won 80% of their games, Austin, but they're a team that if they lose a game like this and it's a blowout, I was talking with this from a couple of our colleagues at the Off the Ball Network, where you can go to offtheballnetwork.com for all your sports needs, by the way. And we were saying that if they got blown out by the Clippers, it would take so much for them to get any sort of validity from big media, right? Because the Jazz, they don't have your prototypical star big wing player. They don't have a second banana. Rudy Gobert, for all the improvements that he's made this season, for as great of a defender as he is, he doesn't really get a lot of credit for being a legit second guy. The rest of the teams, their next best player is arguably coming off their bench. You can argue Mike Conley could be that third best player. And then the rest of it is just a concerted team effort. And Quinn Snyder has done a great job of maximizing all of them together. One of the most cohesive teams. I keep bringing that up because I think that's important, right? That they're one of the most cohesive teams coming in from last season. And I think that's why they're at an 80% win streak, Austin.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think we talked about this a little bit on the last show. They're one of the few teams that's, at the top of their conference that really feels like they have something to prove in the regular season. Even if the Clippers feel that way, no one's going to care. Apparently, the Lakers,
right?
They just did it last year. They know what they're capable of. The Bucks have done it, been number 1 2 years in a row, and the Nets obviously have shown no signs of worry about anything in their game. They're convinced that they're just going to drop 180 anytime they need to. So
they're getting better on defense.
They are. They are. I think in the playoffs you're going to see them really surprise some people who aren't ready for that. But anyway, the Jazz kind of just feel like the one team that really has a chip on their shoulder, collectively. Like, hey, we've been good for 4 or 5 years. You guys just haven't really noticed it that much, and we've had some rough outings in the playoffs a couple times, but they're always there. And when we were doing our preseason rankings, I did 4 or 5 different ones, and I had them second in one, and I was confident about it. And then I was looking at it for a day or so, and I was like, they could finish as far down as like 7th or 8th possibly.
I had them 8th coming into the season.
I think I ended up with 6. I didn't look, but it's somewhere around there. So I should have, I obviously should have kept them higher. But they've been this team for quite a while, and that does definitely show in how well they've been playing this year. They don't have a lot of new pieces to kind of bring in, and it shows that they like playing together.
Yeah, and again, just looking at this game, it's a good win for either team, and it's not really a bad loss for either team either. You can argue that either way. You always want to say that, yeah, we can beat the top teams no matter what, but it's a 4-point loss. We know that that's not really indicative of, how close the game actually was because of fouls and stuff like that kind of happened at the end. But, Donovan Mitchell had 35. Bojan Bogdanovic had 21 on 8 of 11 shooting. I mean, that's efficient right there.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Clarkson coming off the bench shot 53%, had 19 points. Mike Conley was 16 points as a starter. And overall the team shot almost 48% from the floor. They shot 35% from deep, 85% from the line. They had 36 rebounds, 13 assists, 6 blocks, 7 steals, 10 turnovers, 50 points in the paint, and 22 fouls. So when you compare that against what the Clippers did, the Clippers shot 48% from the floor, 33% from deep, 90% from the line. They out rebounded the Jazz, which was huge and kind of surprising when you look at the makeup of both of these teams. You don't really anticipate the Clippers out rebounding the Jazz, but they had 45 rebounds, 11 of those on the offensive rebounds, plus 5 actually on the offensive boards. They had 22 assists to the Jazz's 13. You would think that would almost be inverse coming into this game, right? And then 4 blocks, 5 steals, 44 points in the paint, so less scoring out on the inside, and they committed fewer fouls by only 2. So running through those numbers, Austin, you would almost think coming in that due to the game plan and the construct of both of these teams, that the Jazz would come in passing the rock more, but the Clippers surprisingly have a deep team, and I think that was one of the negative marks against them coming into this year.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. That's exactly what I was thinking. It turns out these guys may actually like playing together, and everybody's a little too nervous and worried about they don't have a leader and they don't really get along that well. It's the NBA. You're going to have guys that have big egos and guys that rub each other the wrong way in a locker room. In every team. Usually, I mean, I'm sure there's never been an NBA team that's never had an issue with teammates not getting along for at least a little while. And winning cures all, and they're winning quite a bit again this year. But like I said at the start, if you just look at the box score and see, the Clippers shot pretty well, but not nearly as good as they have been from 3 this year. And boy, the Jazz looked like everybody that they needed to do their thing did their thing. I'm sure this was probably a close game, and the Jazz pulled it out. And obviously that wasn't the case, but it was a fairly close result for 2 teams that I think showed a lot of people. Both teams showed a lot of people something in that game, because I think a lot of people don't believe in the Clippers. And I also think a lot of people have felt like when the Jazz get down like that, they would just fold. And the fact that they didn't and that they made it a game, speaks volumes.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now we're giving the actual winner of this game, the Clippers, a little bit of the Utah Jazz treatment, because throughout most of the year, the Jazz are just winning, and they're like, "Oh yeah, the Jazz are winning," but did you see Zion Williamson dunk the ball yesterday? Or the Jazz are winning. LeBron James, looked pretty good in his game, or Luka Doncic in a losing effort put up a triple double, or how about Brad Beal leading the league in scoring? Utah wasn't getting any love up until this point, and now we're giving the Clippers a little bit of that Utah treatment. So let's touch on some of their players. Utah really doesn't have anything to be upset about in this game, and here's why I say that. They held, but Kawhi Leonard had 29 points, but he only shot 41% from the floor. Lou Williams had 19 points. Patrick Beverley and Marcus Morris each had 17, and Paul George only, quote unquote, only had 15 points on 6 of 14 shooting. So it was really the others, as we like to say, right, on the Clippers that stepped in. That's huge, having Patrick Beverley and Marcus Morris each have 17 points. If either of those guys don't have, probably an A-plus game, the Jazz are winning this. They held Kawhi to almost 40% scoring. They held Paul George to just under 43% scoring. That's what you want to do when you go up against the Clippers. But, the other guys, and Lou Williams actually had one of his better games of the season, at 19 points on 8 of 14 shooting. Didn't shoot very well from deep, but was just very efficient, made all the right plays throughout the course of the game, Austin.
And, I think I wanted to mention Lou Williams too. I'm glad you said something about him, because he did have, kind of a throwback game for him, it seems like. And I think, honestly, if you really think about it, the career of a LeBron James has kind of skewed the way we think about players in the NBA. Like Lou Williams has been around forever. He
came out of high school too, just like LeBron.
He's been in the NBA, it seems like, my whole life. And, and he's a pretty, slight build guy. He's played forever. His body's got to be, getting to the point where it's going to wear down. I mean, most NBA players about 35, 36 is when you really start seeing that drop off.
And he might be 6 foot.
Right. That's what I mean. You don't see very many little guys in the NBA last that long either. So, I think some of the bashing of him and saying that he showed up out of shape and that he maybe doesn't have enough drive anymore is kind of unfair. It was a shortened off season after a crazy pandemic that the season ended not the way they wanted it to end at all. And, sometimes it takes guys that are 34, 35 a lot longer to get to recuperate from a long NBA season than it does a guy who's 25. I mean, I'm 31 and there's days where, just standing on my feet at work too long make me feel like I can't get out of bed. So, imagine, getting bashed to the ground by guys like Steven Adams for a living. So, Lou Williams looked good, but I'm not 100% confident he can keep that up all year. And like you said, Patrick Beverley and Marcus Morris both showed up in this game at the same time that Lou Williams showed up. And yeah, it looks great when all of it happens at the same time. But are we confident that that's going to happen a lot going forward? I'm not really in playoff scenarios. I mean, but at the same time, I kind of get the feeling like I got about the Lakers last year, where they've got Paul George, they've got Kawhi. If any one of the other guys plays pretty well, they're going to compete and have a really good chance to win. So, there, you said that we were giving them the Utah Jazz treatment. I think the Clippers and the Jazz are very alike in how little they've been talked about. So, they definitely deserve some more shine than they've been getting.
Yeah, and again, I can't speak to how impressive it was that the Jazz did what you want to do against the Clippers, and the Clippers just ultimately at the end of the day did enough to get by.
Right. The rebounding is pretty interesting. Like you said, I would never have guessed that the Clippers would out rebound a team like the Jazz. And I think that Ivica Zubac has had, he's improved quite a bit. He's had a lot of, influence on those rebounding numbers. I haven't watched him a whole lot live since the first game of the year, but I remember him grabbing rebound after rebound against the Lakers. And I just felt like he was a lot more aggressive than I had seen him before.
Well, yeah, and the addition of Serge Ibaka, who has been starting at center for the Clippers, kind of minimizes Zubac's role to where he doesn't have to do more than what he is comfortable doing. So now he can come in and be that rebounder, screen setter, rim runner, and every once in a while protect the basket for you. But again, the Clippers, they pulled out a good game. The Jazz did what you want to do when you play against Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. You held them to, low 40% shooting, and everybody else just stepped in and beat you. So, and again, that's only their 6th loss of the year, though. Sorry to cut you off, Austin, but that's only their 6th loss of the year.
Let's not sugarcoat it. Like, Paul George might be the butt of a lot of jokes, but he's having an incredible year. Like, his shooting numbers have been off the charts.
We're talking like 50, 90
like numbers that people would like laugh at and be like, oh, was that like a 7-game sample? There's no way you can keep that up. And it's almost 30 games now. So he's having a season for the ages for sure, and they shut him down pretty well. So that was impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Austin, that's going to wrap it up for the Utah Jazz discussion here, and hopefully
they love the Jazz.
I love the Jazz too. Hopefully, Utah, you can keep up your
They have a star, by the way. I'm tired of hearing this. They don't have a superstar in Utah. Donovan Mitchell, what more does he need to do?
I don't know. Play on a bigger market. Like, that's really the only thing I think that he could do to change perception of who he is. And Rudy Gobert, same thing too. And how crazy is it that all offseason we were talking about, they got to break these guys up. They got to break these guys up. They don't like each other. They hate playing with each other. Donovan hates Rudy. Like, that was the whole narrative. And now here they are, even off of a loss.
Rudy Gobert started COVID, right?
Well, yeah, he invented it, I think that he was in a lab with the coat and the glasses and, had his beakers and Bunsen burners and all those other tools, created COVID, brought it here to the States from evil, France, and tried to coughed it on everyone's microphone and tried to sabotage the NBA. And against, because he's such a bad person, his evil plan didn't work. So,
and so they rewarded him with $200 million.
Correct. And the best record in the NBA,
Mhm.
and I did have Ben Simmons as my defensive player of the year, but since the past couple weeks of
Mhm.
that, I think that Rudy Gobert has jumped him. And I know
Mhm.
that it's crazy that I'm on the radio. I'm on Nothing But Net on Dash Radio. I'm a radio personality, and I changed my mind.
Mhm.
Isn't that nuts that you
It
can like
is.
look at
It's
change of evidence and your opinion
confusing.
change with that evidence?
Yeah, it's I don't, and it's uncomfortable feeling. I don't know really how this works. Usually, the only time anyone ever does that, they act like they never said the thing that was wrong in the first place. So,
Well, yeah, and we just made it to 50 episodes. I hope
Mhm.
that the editors and that the producers on Dash Radio will still have us on with
Mhm.
their sports
I
personality
hope so
changing his
too.
mind live on the air.
Yeah,
So
yeah. We'll try to keep that to a minimum.
I'll try my best to keep my feet planted and just overlook things and
Mhm.
just say that I still believe in Ben Simmons
This
being
is
the
what
guy.
I
But
think,
anyway,
and this is what
seriously,
I'm gonna think.
I'm all right. So I'm done ranting. But anyway, I think that Rudy Gobert has jumped ahead of Ben Simmons as
Mhm.
the best defender in the NBA. Did you know that he's like has the most defensive possessions of anybody in the entire
I
NBA?
I
And
actually did see that in something I was looking up the other day.
I believe that he is top 7 last time I looked in points per possession, which the most defensive possessions, and you're still like top 5 or 7 in points
Mhm.
per possession,
It's
and the guys
insane.
ahead of you aren't like running away with it either. Like
Right,
that's nuts.
right. And they're probably
Absolutely.
not getting even close to the number of defensive possessions he is.
Absolutely not. He's like, I think he's last time I looked almost 200 possessions ahead of second place.
That's insane.
It is, which it's also insane that people still run at him. Like,
Mhm.
why would you do that to yourselves?
It's pretty interesting that we're talking about one of the few teams in the NBA that seems like they still care about defense because this next segment that we're going to do and the team that we're going to discuss, I have my doubts about whether or not they think they care about defense very much. So,
Well, we will take what the bait that you just laid out and we will transition to the debut. Yes, on our 50th episode together, Austin, we are rolling out a new segment, completely unintentional, but we're going to make it sound
Mhm.
like we knew that this was happening all
Right.
along. We've been planning this for months, that
Mhm.
on our 50th episode that we would debut a new segment that we are calling Backpage News. And
Yes.
today we are going to feature, as you said, well, kind of sort of said, you were alluding to it, as they say,
Mhm.
the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, Austin, what's the premise of Backpage News?
So I, for one, think it's a great idea because when I was growing up, we still read newspapers. I got the newspaper every day. And one of the things I always loved about the sports section was the stories on the back page or in the back couple of pages. That sometimes they were local, sometimes they were professional stories, but they were stories about a feel good story or the exact opposite that you just don't hear much about. That's why it's on the back page. It's not going to draw a ton of people's attention, but if you take the time to read it, it should. And it is, solid stories and good and, news that needs to be talked about. So, your idea, I think, behind it was just to shine some light on some things that people just are overlooking for whatever reason that we don't think they should be.
Well, and it's because we had what we just talked about, games like the Utah Jazz
Mhm.
versus the Los Angeles Clippers. But
Mhm.
we're going to highlight the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, Austin, the reason that I wanted to bring them up is that this was a team that came into the season with lofty expectations.
Mhm.
And, they have one of the most exciting young players in the NBA. They have the reigning most improved player on their team as well. It looked like they did everything that they could to get better outside of trading away Drew Holiday for, a boatload of assets. But, they bring in Eric Bledsoe, they bring in
Mhm.
Steven Adams, they keep JJ Redick, they developed all their young guys, and then they bring in a guy who has been in the booth for a while in Stan Van Gundy after letting Alvin Gentry go, which we can
Mhm.
debate whether or not that was the right move or not. I felt like at the time it wasn't fair because his limited sample with Zion Williamson, which we'll
Mhm.
highlight here in a minute. But I totally get the entire body of work that he didn't do well with Anthony Davis. Now you can argue that the front office didn't either. But anyway,
Right.
coaching change, roster changes, drafted well. I think in both of our eyes, we both like Kira Lewis Jr.
Mhm.
and he fell to them and they picked him up. But Austin, what's been disappointing in your eyes about the New Orleans Pelicans?
Um, just they're kind of just blah to me. Like they're not terrible, but they're not as good as I expected them to be. I think the NBA front office, the way they scheduled the live games, were pretty confident that they were going to be one of the most exciting, teams that was going to improve quite a bit. And it just really hasn't materialized. And they're not getting blown out. And they're not in last place or anything like that. And I think you and I, at least, our expectations were fairly tempered. We figured they'd be in the playoff picture, and currently they're not.
Yeah. So where did you have them ranked? And I'm not like trying to like throw salt or anything. I couldn't find where you had them ranked in our previous work.
I'm pretty sure I had them in the play-in tournament. I had them either 8th or 9th.
Yeah.
I think I had them, Memphis, the Suns, and Portland. I think were the 4 teams that I had in the 7, 8, 9, 10 spots. I don't remember exactly which was which, but
well, Austin, you weren't way off of what I thought. I had them 9th as well, but Vegas actually had them projected to be in 9th place too. I believe in a 72 game sample, they had them with 36.5 wins. So, you can't win a half game. So let's just round up and say that Vegas had them winning 37 games. Right now, Austin, in their first 30, they just played tonight and they did win. So a little bit of salt in our story. They won on the night that we're talking about them. But overall, that still brings them up to 13-17 with new coach, with a building, Zion Williamson, which I believe that today was his 53rd NBA game in 2 seasons. So there's that aspect of it. But one thing I wanted to highlight, and I feel like it's appropriate to do so, especially with how quick we are to dismiss coaches. Now, again, Alvin Gentry spent, I believe, about 4 or 5 seasons in New Orleans before he was dismissed. But I think it's appropriate to bring this up. So this season, as we mentioned, that they're 13-17. Currently, they're 12th place in the Western Conference. They have gone up a whopping 1 spot from where they finished last season, where they were 13th. This season, in their first 29 games, not counting the game that they just beat the Boston Celtics in a thrilling overtime victory, but their first 29 games, they were 12-17. Last season, they were 7-22. Now, you would say, wait, Steven, that's marketed improvement. So what's your complaint? Well, Zion didn't debut until well after that point, right? So let's talk about what Alvin Gentry did with Zion Williamson, because that's what Van Gundy is dealing with now. In 28 games, right? So 1 game fewer than what we had seen prior to this game from Stan Van Gundy. In 28 games, they won 1 more game. They were 13-15, right? So they actually did, by victory and win percentage in fewer games, did better under Alvin Gentry than they are with Zion Williamson. And you could argue that this is an improved roster from what they had last season, right, Austin?
Right. Oh, definitely. And, I'll kind of get into the roster a little bit here soon, but they're similar to last year, but there's a lot of guys that I feel like that it could be part of the reason that they're missing now, that I think people maybe didn't really think that we're going to be missed that much. So, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think on paper, anybody would agree that they look like a deeper, more well-rounded team. And you said it best. I mean, who wouldn't expect a full season with Zion to go better?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And we see now that Stan had, albeit a limited offseason training camp, things like that, he had more time with Zion Williamson than Alvin Gentry did, and he's not dealing with the minutes restriction aspect that Alvin Gentry had to dance around to when Zion did come back. So not only did Alvin do more with a lesser roster when he had Zion Williamson, but he didn't get to implement Zion Williamson to the fullest. There was the game against the Spurs, his very first game in the NBA, Austin. We were like, they could win this game if they weren't worried about Zion Williamson being made of glass, apparently, right? So it just seemed like Alvin Gentry that season, I completely ignore everything else that he did prior to, but that season it felt like Alvin Gentry was destined to be the fall guy. And Stan Van Gundy, we talked about him coming into the season and whether or not we need to temper our expectations for him, because we like him as a broadcaster, so therefore he's going to be a great head coach, right? Like, not the case. We've seen him, just like Jeff, we even did a side-by-side with him earlier in the year, where he, after that NBA Finals appearance with Orlando, it was a precipitous drop, and we saw why he was let go. And the same thing with Detroit. He had more responsibilities and did a worse job. And then spent time in the broadcast booth, a la Steve Kerr, comes back in, to our eyes in that manner. And we just fall in love with him because he is a brilliant mind, but is he the right NBA head coach for a Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball style of roster?
I don't know. That's a good point. It's been quite a few years since he's really done much in terms of developing young players that he's had on his roster, because, when he was with Detroit, everybody just blamed it on him trying to wear two hats and being the GM and the coach, and kind of just never even considered the idea that maybe his coaching was more the culprit of their, issues than him having too much to do. And I don't feel like the key guys on this team look like they've made significant improvements from last year. Like, we just saw Brandon Ingram make one of the biggest leaps in recent memory from one year to the next, and he looks exactly like the same player from last year right now. And I know they had a shortened off season, but guys in the NBA at his age, you hear it all the time. They tend to add something to their game every off season, 1 year right after another. And right now he hasn't shown that. And then there's a lot of, the others, like you said, and bench guys that just haven't played up to, what they did last year with Van Gundy.
Yeah. And Van Gundy right now, he has 2 NBA All-Stars on his team. I don't think that it would be a surprise for many people to see Zion Williamson be an NBA All-Star this season. I don't think that Brandon Ingram is one this year, but he was one last year, right?
It's a deep year for All-Star for sure. So that's not a slight on him.
It's really not. And I've talked about this before. There are about 16 guys in the Western Conference right now that I think deserve, quote unquote, an All-Star spot, but it's just not in the cards with the limitations on roster spots, right? So I don't. And look at this, right? So Austin, they're not completely. You mentioned that they're not a trash team right now in the NBA. They're 6th in field goal percentage. They're about league average in 3-point percentage, which is kind of odd for a Van Gundy team, right? 26th in free throw percentage, and a lot of that is just due to the fact that Zion Williamson gets to the line more than anybody in the NBA, and he's just not a knockdown 3-point shooter. First in offensive rebounds, 18th in defensive rebounds, which if you combine those two together, they're 5th in total. They're 13th in assists. I think that that's something that we were expecting. 14th in steals, 29th in blocks, 18th in turnovers, 3rd in fouls, and 8th in points. So offensively, I think they're about where we were expecting, but I know that you wanted to highlight their defensive limitations.
Yeah. So you brought up a lot of good numbers, and one of the glaring things that I see is, you even said it, it's weird for a Van Gundy team to be middle of the road from 3, and they were 5th in the NBA in 3-point shooting last year. And so that's a big drop off, and that's a big part of their issue. But let's talk about their defense a little bit. 30th in the NBA in assists given up per game. That tells me that they've got a lot of inexperienced players who don't understand rotations and coverages quite well enough yet, because it seems like the offense is just picking their defense apart. And then too, they're really down towards the bottom in terms of the opponent's 3-point shooting against them, which signifies to me that they're probably getting a lot of good open looks. And they're an exciting team to watch on offense, but not when they're giving up 120 points every game on defense. They're not, the Nets who can live with that and still win. And most teams aren't. And that's where I think Jrue Holiday's missed the most, because we know JJ Redick's not a defensive stopper. Last year, his numbers were okay. I think his net rating for the season was a +5, and he's like a -12 right now. His defensive rating is 126. And I think you can expect him to not be a defensive, force, but Jrue Holiday was, and kind of covered a lot of that up. And Eric Bledsoe is a huge downgrade in that aspect in my eyes.
He looked good in Milwaukee though on the defensive end of the ball, didn't he?
He did, and I don't know what what it is, but his numbers are not. I think his net rating is -9 right now, and Drew Holiday's was like +7 last year. And so those sound like small numbers, but if you've got 4 or 5 guys who are significantly 6 or 7 points worse than the last year, that adds up. So, right now they're just too young and not quite good enough offensively to overcome all the limitations they have on defense, especially on the perimeter.
Well, and I think too, if you look at a guy like Eric Bledsoe, it's pretty easy to play risky defense on a team where you got, the defensive player of the year in Giannis Antetokounmpo, arguably another defensive player of the year candidate in Brook Lopez, and other good defenders on that team too, like a Chris Middleton. On this team, when your front court consists of Brandon Ingram, who for all of his offensive abilities, he's not really a great defender. He could do a little bit of those come from behind blocks and stuff like that, but he's not really a set defender.
Right. He's got some
Zion Williamson. Yeah, he's got some length. He's got a frame to where he could be a little disruptive, but and then Zion, he seems like he could be built to be a good defender, but and his leaping ability, especially on jump shots, helps him out a lot. But when you're talking about post defense, you look at these numbers that I listed off on offense. On the defensive end, they're the bottom third in field goal percentage allowed, 3-point percentage allowed, and rebounds allowed. So the lack of a height for Zion Williamson and the fact that he's only one player on the floor against an entire offense, it kind of hurts when you have that front court. And then again, Steven Adams, he missed time tonight in and out of the lineup. And then Jackson Hayes isn't really established himself as a great big. Hernan Gomez in and out. Melly is not a good defender either. It doesn't seem like their front court would allow them to be a lockdown defense.
Right. And, if you really think about it, Zion Williamson has never really been taught how to play defense. Think about it, his last few seasons before he came into the NBA. He played for Duke, where, I'm sure Coach K coached him up a little bit, but he was a giant, full-grown man bullying around a bunch of 19-year-old college kids.
Correct.
And never really had to struggle. And before that, look at his high school tapes. Like, he was playing against a bunch of little kids.
Yeah, he's playing against us, Austin. You can just say that.
Right. That's actually what was going through my mind. That's funny. So, he's never had to guard, anyone even close to really as big as him very often in his career, and let alone learn all the drop coverages and rotations and switches. And I'm sure Van Gundy's defense isn't simple. So, he's going to be a step slow. He's like the heaviest guy in the NBA. I think he'll get there. And I do think their age has a lot to do with it on the defensive end too. And I just kind of expected Van Gundy to have a little bit more of a positive effect than he's had.
Yeah. And again, I can't stress enough how much better with Zion Williamson. And I say how much, it's not by much, but the fact that that it's above what we're seeing with Van Gundy, I think is significant. With Zion Williamson, Alvin Gentry in those 9 games that he had one more victory, right? So
and Alvin Gentry knew his time was up there. Like they got a new GM. He had just had to deal with all that Anthony Davis stuff. And anytime a new GM comes in, unless they're a successful team, they're going to want their own guy. So he was handcuffed the whole time.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, Austin, we're coming to an end real quick, and I know that there was one topic that you wanted to bring up, and we'll just touch on that real quick. And people are kind of questioning why the Houston Rockets are all of a sudden looking to move on from DeMarcus Cousins after fully guaranteeing his contract. And we could talk about this more, obviously, when he does get picked up by another team. There's no shortage of suitors that would like to have him. But Austin, what's your insight on why the Rockets would fully guarantee his contract and then look to send him somewhere else?
Well, put it simply as I can, it's because they wanted him to have a chance to go somewhere where he could compete for a title, and wanted to give Christian Wood more opportunity to develop as their future big man, and other young guys to have more of a chance to develop. So they wanted to do right by DeMarcus Cousins. They even came out and said it in a statement because of his professionalism and leadership in the locker room. They wanted to do right by him and make sure he got his money and help him get to a place that he wants to be. So, it's obviously a very good look on that end from the Houston Rockets.
Mm-hmm.
And the real reason I was wanting to talk about it was because I've heard a lot of chatter on social media and in the news that, oh, I'm sure DeMarcus Cousins did something to make them change their minds and want to get rid of him. And it's the exact
basically
opposite.
making him out to be like, what we would see out of him in Sacramento and that narrative coming out of there.
Exactly. Like, it's people that don't watch and know what they knew about him 2 or 3 years ago, assuming things, and it's the exact opposite. So not only that, if anyone knows anything about what's been going on with Houston, is they've been spending this whole season trying to play, cover up for how much James Harden has been bad mouthing how they treated him when he threw a fit and wanted to get out.
That's a good point.
So, they wanted to put on a good face and show future potential free agents like, hey, this guy was here for 30 games and look how we took care of him. We'll always take care of our players. And, they don't want to have a reputation as a front office that doesn't treat their stars right. So, they had a chance. They saw a chance to get some good publicity. They saw a chance to do right by a guy who deserved it, and an opportunity where there was no reason to keep him on the team anymore if they're not going to compete.
Yeah, absolutely. And he has deserved it. And like we talked about offline in our group chat, that it wouldn't be a break in the game episode if I didn't mention the group chat. But we talked about how DeMarcus Cousins, they were wanting to do right by him. And that makes a lot of sense. And like you said, if you pay attention to the games and you pay attention to the way that the Rocket season has gone, anything good that is coming out of Houston, you can look at John Wall, you can look at DeMarcus Cousins, and you can look at Christian Wood. And even Victor Oladipo's. Basically the island of misfit toys down in H-Town right now. And they're all conducting themselves extremely well.
Right. It's two guys that are known as being buddies in college who both have kind of had their issues. Two players that feel like their teams gave up on them and their fans were fed up with them. Guys that, earned the reputations that they had for a period of time. And then you've got like you said with Oladipo, like he didn't really do anything to fall into that category other than get hurt and maybe to be a little too friendly with the Miami Heat players in a pregame warm up. But
let Indiana know before it came to a bad situation.
Everybody hated Paul George
money.
He blindsided them, and Oladipo's been telling them all along, like, "Hey, I'm not gonna tell you something that's not true. This is what I want, and if they're not gonna give it to me, I'm not gonna stay."
Yeah, so, I'm a max player. I want to be paid like I'm not saying that he is, but that's how he, phrased it.
And he's shown in Houston. He still shows flashes and moments where you see that he can be the type of guy that can take over a game, and he doesn't do it enough, and he needs to be more consistent with that. But he's definitely come back well from the injury and all the drama that wasn't drama before the bubble and all that. So, maybe it kind of was probably a good thing that these guys all ended up together, because they were like, hey, nobody believes in us. Why don't we just go out here and ball? And they seem like they've all, done fairly well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just real quick, shout out to Steven Silas for the job that he's doing down there. Yes. The Rockets don't look good on the court, but for everything that he's been dealt with, I think that he's handled it tremendously. But Austin, that's going to wrap up our 50th episode together. Thank you so much, man, for being on the show and continuing to do this with me week in and week out, man.
Man, it's an honor. I love doing it. I always tell you, and I mean it every time I tell you. I look forward to it every day. So thank you for having me. Here's to 50 more and 50 more and 50 more and 50 more.
There you go. And shout out to the NBA, the Nothing But Net channel here on Dash Radio, where we cover NBA news. Shout out to the Off the Ball Network for giving us a chance to be able to work there with that fantastic group of guys. Shout out to the game of basketball for giving us something to do when we're not at work or hanging out with our families. But Austin, man, this has been a great episode. For everybody who's listening, thank you guys so much for tuning in, whether you're watching live or you're listening on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. Thank you for all the love and support. Please just go download the podcast, which will be out soon after you hear this, and just keep listening every Monday and Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, and we'll get you guys home talking NBA basketball. But for my awesome co-host, Austin Carr, for myself, for the Off the Ball Network, for the Nothing But Net channel here on Dash Radio, for the game of basketball, for our 50th episode and all the many more to come, we have been the Breaking the Game show. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll catch up with you guys next time. Much love, everybody.
Have a good one.